The lobby was quiet in the way expensive places often are, not silent, just carefully controlled. Soft piano music floated through the air, polished marble reflected warm lights, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with expensive perfume. Everything was designed to remind you that this was a place for people who belonged. And then there was Ethan Miller. Ethan stood near the front desk, shoulders slightly hunched, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. He was 11 years old, thin in a way that came from missed meals, not growth spurts. His sneakers were worn, the laces frayed, and his jacket was one size too big, clearly borrowed, clearly old. In his hand he held a small folded banknote. It wasn't money in the usual sense. It was a stamped voucher from a local charity, an agreement between the foundation and the hotel. One simple promise: a warm meal for a child who had nowhere else to go that day. Ethan didn't look around much. He wasn't sightseeing. He wasn't curious. He was focused on one thing only: getting through this moment without being noticed. He cleared his throat quietly. "Excuse me, ma'am." Behind the counter stood Linda Carter, the lobby manager. Perfect posture, immaculate suit. Hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it had never known disorder. She glanced down at the paper in Ethan's hand with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took the banknote between two fingers, and without hesitation she tore it in half. The sound was sharp, clean, final. For a brief second, no one reacted. Not the guests waiting behind Ethan, not the concierge, not the couple near the Christmas tree taking photos as if the lobby were just a backdrop for their vacation. Ethan froze. The torn pieces slipped from Linda's hand and fluttered down onto the marble floor, landing near Ethan's shoes. Blue ink, a crooked stamp, a signature now split in two. Linda exhaled through her nose, a faint, almost amused sound. "This is not valid here," she said calmly. "Next, please." Ethan didn't move. He stared at the pieces on the floor as if his body hadn't received the message yet. As if this couldn't possibly be happening. Not here, not like this, not so quickly. I was told," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "They said today. Just lunch." Linda raised one hand, not angrily, not dramatically. Just enough to stop him, the way someone stops a barking dog. Or an inconvenience. "There are places in the city that help with things like this," she said. "This is a hotel." A woman behind Ethan shifted impatiently, clutching her handbag a little tighter. Someone coughed. Another person checked their phone. No one said anything. Slowly, Ethan bent down. He knelt on the cold marble floor and began picking up the torn pieces of the banknote. His fingers trembled as he tried to fit them together, as if the paper might heal itself if he was careful enough. One piece had slid near the gold trim at the base of the counter. He stretched awkwardly to reach it, his jacket riding up his back. It was a small movement, a quiet moment, but in a place built on appearances it felt unbearable. Linda looked past him now, already greeting the next guest with warmth, complimenting a scarf, asking about someone's grandchildren. Her smile returned effortlessly, as if Ethan had never been there at all. Ethan stood up slowly, holding the torn paper in both hands like something fragile. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't ask again. And that was when someone else noticed him. From a chair near the revolving door, a man in a gray coat lifted his eyes from his phone. He hadn't looked important. He hadn't looked powerful. Just another guest waiting. But the moment the paper tore, he had stopped scrolling. And he hadn't missed a single second since. Ethan stood there longer than he should have. Not because he expected the woman behind the counter to change her mind, but because his body hadn't yet caught up with what had just happened. The torn pieces of the banknote rested in his hands, thin and useless now, like a promise that had been quietly revoked. The lobby felt larger all of a sudden, too bright, too open. The piano continued to play, unaware, filling the space with a melody that felt strangely inappropriate. The sound echoed off the marble floors and high ceilings, bouncing around Ethan as if mocking the stillness he couldn't escape. "Next, please," Linda Carter said again, this time with a smile meant for someone else. A man in a tailored coat stepped forward. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't need to. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and placed his reservation card on the counter, as if stepping around a puddle on the sidewalk. Ethan shifted his weight. His stomach tightened. Not from fear, but from hunger. The kind that doesn't growl anymore because it's been empty for too long. The kind that makes your hands feel light and your legs feel uncertain. He swallowed hard. "Ma'am," he said quietly, trying again. Not louder, not more demanding, just clearer. They told me it would work. The foundation called ahead. Linda didn't sigh. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look annoyed. She leaned slightly forward and lowered her voice the way adults do when they believe they're being kind. You need to understand something, she said. This place has standards. The word hung in the air. Standards. She glanced at his jacket, his shoes, the frayed edge of his sleeve. Those standards exist for a reason. Ethan nodded automatically, even though he didn't understand what he was agreeing to. Adults often spoke in ways that made things sound reasonable, even when they weren't. I just want to eat, he said. I'll be quick, I won't bother anyone. A flicker passed across Linda's face. Not anger, not sympathy. Calculation. This isn't personal, she said. But we can't have situations like this in the lobby. Situations. As if Ethan were a spill that needed to be cleaned up before someone noticed. She straightened and gestured subtly toward the revolving doors, their glass panels spinning slowly as guests passed in and out. There are shelters, she continued. Churches. Places meant for this. Ethan followed her gaze to the door. Outside, he could see the gray street, the hurried movement of people wrapped in coats, shoulders hunched against the cold. A gust of wind rattled the glass. He didn't move. Behind him, someone cleared their throat loudly. A woman muttered something about being late. Another guest shifted closer, clearly expecting the obstacle in front of them to disappear. No one spoke up. No one said, "He's just a kid." No one said, "Let him eat." Ethan felt his face burn. Not with anger, but with that familiar heat of embarrassment that crawls up your neck and settles behind your eyes. The kind that makes you want to shrink, to fold inward, to become smaller than you already are. He looked down at the torn paper again. One piece still showed the stamp of the foundation. The ink was slightly smudged, like it had been handled too many times. He tried lining it up with the other half, pressing the edges together with his thumb. It didn't work. Linda watched him for a moment, then turned her attention back to the counter. "Please, step aside," she said, her tone firm now. "You're holding up the line." Ethan took a small step backward, then another. It wasn't a dramatic retreat. He wasn't being pushed or dragged. His body simply responded the way it had learned to respond in places where he didn't belong. Move out of the way. Don't make trouble. Don't take up space. He ended up near a tall column by the side of the lobby, half hidden, where the light was softer and people passed without looking. For a moment, he just stood there. The smell of food drifted in from somewhere deeper inside the hotel. Warm bread, soup, something savory. His stomach twisted painfully, and he pressed his elbow lightly against his side, as if that might quiet it. A cleaning cart rolled past him, pushed by an older woman with tired eyes. She glanced at him briefly, her gaze lingering just long enough to recognize what was happening. She didn't say anything, but she slowed her steps. "Stay there," she murmured as she passed, barely moving her lips. "Don't leave." Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't sure he was allowed to. Across the lobby, Linda laughed softly at something a guest had said. Her voice was warm now, easy. She complimented a scarf, asked about someone's grandson. The transition was seamless. As if Ethan had never existed. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. The piano music shifted to something lighter, almost cheerful. Ethan hated it. It made everything worse. He reached into his pocket without thinking and found a single coin. It was warm from his skin, smelling faintly of metal and the bus he'd ridden earlier. He closed his fist around it tightly, grounding himself in something real. Near the Christmas tree, 2 teenagers took photos, smiling and adjusting their hair. A man in a business suit walked by, speaking into his phone, his voice confident and assured. Life went on. Ethan wondered if this was how people disappeared. Not all at once, but gradually, in places like this, where no one was technically doing anything wrong. Finally, Linda noticed him again. Her eyes landed on him the way one might notice a stain on glass, annoyed that it was still there. "You're still here?" she asked loudly enough for others to hear. Several heads turned. Ethan straightened instinctively, pressing his back against the wall. "I don't have anywhere to go," he said. The words came out before he could stop them. Honest, unfiltered. For a moment, the lobby seemed to hold its breath. A woman clutched her purse a little tighter. A man looked down at his shoes. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Linda stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward Ethan, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. She stopped far too close, her perfume heavy in the air. She lowered her voice again. "Listen," she said, as if offering advice. "I'm trying to help you avoid further embarrassment." Ethan looked past her toward the door. "I just wanted to eat inside," he said. "Just once, so I wouldn't feel different." Linda let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Different? She repeated. You are different. She tilted her head slightly. And that's exactly why you can't stay. The words landed cleanly, efficiently. Ethan felt something inside him fold. Not break, just collapse inward, like a chair being put away. He lowered his eyes. He didn't cry. He had learned a long time ago that crying didn't change outcomes. It only made them faster. What he didn't see was the man in the gray coat rising slowly from his chair near the revolving door. What he didn't know was that someone had been watching. Not with curiosity, not with pity, but with attention. Careful, deliberate attention. And for the first time since Ethan had walked into the lobby, the balance of that room was about to shift. The man in the gray coat did not rush. That detail mattered. He didn't stand up with urgency, didn't clear his throat to draw attention, didn't raise his voice or wave a hand. He rose slowly from the chair near the revolving door, as if he had all the time in the world, and that, more than anything, changed the air in the lobby. His name was Michael Reynolds. At least that's the name he usually used when he didn't want to be recognized. He adjusted his coat, slid his phone into his pocket, and took a few steps forward. Not toward the counter yet, but toward one of the tall columns that offered a clearer view of both the desk and the boy pressed against the wall. Michael's face showed no anger, no pity either, only focus. The kind of focus that comes from someone who has spent a lifetime watching people make decisions when they think no one important is paying attention. Ethan didn't notice him. The boy's eyes were fixed on the floor now, tracing invisible lines in the marble as if they might lead somewhere safer. His shoulders were stiff, his breathing shallow. Hunger and humiliation had a way of shrinking people from the inside. Linda Carter, on the other hand, had already moved on. She returned behind the counter, smiling again, fingers dancing across her tablet as she greeted the next guest by name. Her voice was smooth, practiced, trained to make people feel welcome as long as they fit the image. Michael watched the contrast closely. Moments ago, she had spoken to Ethan as if he were a problem to be managed. Now she laughed softly, complimenting a man's tie, asking about travel plans. The switch was flawless. Michael took another step closer. Not aggressively, not obviously, just close enough to hear. Ethan shifted slightly against the wall. His knees felt weak, and he wasn't sure if it was from standing too long or from the hollow ache in his stomach. He glanced toward the revolving door again, measuring the distance, calculating how quickly he could leave without drawing more attention. Before he could move, a voice cut through the carefully maintained calm of the lobby. "Excuse me." It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp, but it was steady. Linda looked up automatically, the professional smile already in place. "Yes, sir," she said. "How can I help you?" Michael met her eyes. Up close, there was nothing remarkable about him. Mid-50s, perhaps. Lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested long days rather than easy ones. His clothes were neat but understated. No logos, no flash. "I have a question," he said. Linda nodded, patient. "Of course." Michael gestured lightly, not toward Ethan, but toward the empty space between them. "I couldn't help noticing what just happened." Linda's smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes tightened. "I was handling an internal matter," she replied smoothly. "Everything is under control." Michael tilted his head slightly. "I'm sure you believe that," he said. The words were polite, reasonable, but they landed heavier than expected. Linda's fingers paused on the tablet. "I saw you tear up that voucher," Michael continued. "The one from the charity." Linda straightened. "Sir," she said, her tone still courteous but firmer now, "that document was invalid." Michael nodded slowly, as if considering her explanation. "Invalid," he repeated. "Interesting." He glanced briefly toward Ethan, then back to Linda. "Because from where I was sitting it looked stamped, signed, dated." Linda inhaled, then exhaled carefully. "This hotel has policies," she said. "We can't allow—" "Who decides what's allowed?" Michael asked. The interruption was gentle, almost conversational, but it stopped her mid-sentence. "I do," Linda replied quickly. "I manage the lobby." Michael smiled faintly, not with humor, but with recognition. "So it was your decision," he said, "to tear it?" Linda hesitated for half a second. "That's not exactly—" "But it was your decision," Michael said calmly. The silence that followed was subtle but noticeable. A few nearby guests shifted their weight. Someone stopped pretending to look at their phone. Linda recovered quickly. "Sir," she said, "if you have a complaint, there is a formal process." "I'm not complaining," Michael replied. "I'm clarifying." He took a step closer to the counter now. "And I'm curious about something else." Linda's jaw tightened. "What's that?" Michael leaned forward just slightly, lowering his voice. not to intimidate, but to ensure only she could hear. "If that voucher was invalid," he said, "why didn't you throw it away?" Linda blinked. "I did." Michael held her gaze. "No, you didn't?" A flicker of irritation crossed her face. "I don't appreciate being accused." "Then open the drawer," Michael said. The words were simple, direct. Linda laughed softly, a sound was meant to dismiss. "There's nothing in the drawer." Michael nodded once. "Then there's no harm in opening it." Behind the counter, Linda's hand hovered near the drawer handle. Across the lobby, Ethan looked up for the first time, confusion flickering across his face. He didn't understand what was happening, but something in the room had shifted, and even he could feel it. Linda glanced around, searching for support, for agreement, for someone to remind this man who was in charge. No one met her eyes. "Sir," she said quietly, "you're interfering with hotel operations." Michael didn't raise his voice. "I'm standing in a public lobby," he replied, "watching how a child is treated." That word, child, hung in the air longer than the rest. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Security," she said, turning her head slightly. "Tom?" From near the entrance, the security guard looked up, alert now. Michael didn't move. "Before you touch him," Michael said calmly, addressing the guard without looking at him, "I suggest you open the drawer." Tom hesitated. Linda's eyes widened just a fraction. "You don't have authority here," she snapped. Michael finally straightened fully. "You're right," he said. For a moment, Linda looked relieved. Then he added, "Not yet." Ethan watched all of this with his heart pounding, not daring to hope, but unable to look away. And for the first time since he'd stepped into the lobby, someone wasn't talking about him. They were talking because of him. The drawer remained closed, but the room was no longer on Linda's side. And whatever was inside that drawer was about to matter far more than she realized. The security guard hesitated. That alone was unusual. Tom Harris had worked security for over a decade. He knew the rhythm of places like this, the unspoken rules, the quiet authority of management, the expectation that when a manager spoke, security acted. Most situations ended before they began. A nod, a gentle escort, a problem removed without noise. But this time Tom didn't move. His eyes flicked from Linda Carter to the man standing calmly at the counter. The man in the gray coat hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened anyone. Yet something about the way he stood, balanced, unhurried, made Tom pause. Linda noticed the hesitation immediately. "Tom," she said again, sharper now, "please ask this gentleman and the boy to leave the lobby." Her words were precise, professional, final. Ethan felt them hit before he fully understood them. The word leave landed like a door closing somewhere deep inside him. He pressed his shoulder harder against the wall, instinctively shrinking back as if making himself smaller might somehow make the order pass over him. Michael didn't look at Ethan. He didn't need to. He could see the boys' reaction reflected in the polished marble beneath their feet. The subtle shift, the tightening posture, the way hope learned to retreat. Michael turned slightly, addressing Tom directly for the first time. "Before you do that," he said, "I want you to consider something." Tom swallowed. "Yes, sir?" Linda's eyes widened. "Tom, you don't need to—" "I'm just asking him to consider," Michael said gently. He leaned one hand against the counter, casual, almost relaxed. "You're about to remove a child from this lobby," he continued. "A child who hasn't raised his voice, hasn't touched anyone, hasn't broken anything." Tom glanced at Ethan. Up close, the boy looked even younger than he had from a distance. Pale, thin, trying very hard not to cry. Michael followed Tom's gaze. "He came in with a voucher," Michael said. "A stamped voucher from a foundation this hotel works with. That voucher was torn up in front of him." Linda scoffed softly. "That document was invalid," she repeated. Michael nodded. "Then it should be in the trash," he said. "Not in a drawer." The word drawer echoed again, heavier now. Linda crossed her arms. "You're making assumptions," she said. "And you're disrupting service." Michael didn't argue. He simply looked at Tom. "Do you feel comfortable escorting him out?" he asked. "Knowing that?" Tom hesitated again. His training told him to defer to management. His instincts told him something wasn't right. "I'm just following orders," Tom said quietly. Michael acknowledged that with a small nod. "I know," he said. "That's usually how these things work." Linda straightened, seizing the opening. "Exactly," she said. "So, let's not drag this out." She gestured toward Ethan with a curt tilt of her chin. "Tom, take care of it." Tom took a step forward. Ethan's heart jumped into his throat. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He simply looked up, past Tom, past Linda, toward the man in the gray coat. There was no accusation in his eyes, no plea, just a question he didn't know how to ask. "Is it over?" Michael answered without words. "Tom," he said calmly, "what shift are you working today?" The question stopped Tom mid-step. "Day shift," he replied, confused. Michael nodded. "And you're still assigned Master Access Key number 7, correct?" Tom's brow furrowed. "Yes," he said slowly. "How did you—" Linda's posture stiffened. "That's enough," she snapped. "You're crossing a line." Michael didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Tom. "Before you touch him," Michael said, "open the drawer." Linda moved instinctively, placing her body between Michael and the counter. "There is nothing in that drawer," she said sharply. "It's private." Michael finally turned to face her fully. For the first time, the warmth left his expression. "Open it," he said. The temperature in this room seemed to drop. Linda laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You don't have the authority to—" "Open it," Michael repeated. That was what made it frightening. Tom looked at Linda, waiting for confirmation. Permission. Direction. Linda's jaw tightened. "This is absurd," she said. "You're not staff, you're not management." Michael nodded once. "Correct," he said. "I'm neither." Linda exhaled sharply. Turning to Tom. "You see," she said. "Remove them." Tom hesitated again. The piano music in the background shifted to a softer tune, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Michael leaned closer to the counter, lowering his voice so only Linda could hear. "You tore that voucher because you thought no one important was watching," he said quietly. "You put the pieces in the drawer because throwing them away felt unnecessary." Linda's face flushed beneath her makeup. "I don't know who you think you are." "You're about to find out who you are," Michael replied. He straightened and addressed Tom again, this time with unmistakable authority. "Tom," he said, "open the drawer." Something changed in Tom's eyes. Not fear, recognition. Slowly, deliberately, Tom stepped behind the counter. Linda reached out instinctively to stop him, her hand hovering in the air. "Don't," she whispered. Tom paused, then gently moved her hand aside. "I need to see," he said quietly. Linda's hand fell back to her side, empty. Tom pulled the drawer open. Inside, crumpled and unmistakable, were the torn pieces of Ethan's voucher, and beneath them, others. Folded, wrinkled, some intact, some partially torn, all bearing the same stamp, the same foundation name. A collective breath swept through the nearby guests. Ethan took a step forward, his legs shaking. That's mine," he said softly. Linda's mouth opened, but no words came out. Michael didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply gestured toward the drawer. "Those weren't mistakes," he said. "They were choices." Linda regained her voice, panic sharpening her tone. "This proves nothing," she said. "Those people weren't authorized to be here." Michael turned to Tom. "How many vouchers does the kitchen prepare for each day?" he asked. Tom hesitated, then answered honestly. 12, he said. "Usually, HIE." Michael nodded. "And how many people from the foundation ate here today?" Tom looked down at the drawer. 6, he said quietly. The silence that followed was not polite. It was heavy. Linda backed away a step. "You don't understand," she said quickly. "I was protecting the hotel. Standards matter. Image matters." Michael finally looked at Ethan again. The boy stood frozen, clutching the torn paper, his eyes darting between the drawer and Linda, trying to understand how something so small could suddenly matter so much. Michael addressed the room. "A hotel's standard," he said, "isn't measured by how clean the floors are." He looked at Linda. "It's measured by how it treats the people who can't fight back." Linda's voice cracked. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted. "We can discuss this privately." Michael shook his head. "No," he said. "You discussed it publicly when you tore his voucher." He reached into his coat pocket and placed a black card on the counter. He didn't slide it. He didn't present it dramatically. He simply placed it there and stepped back. Tom's eyes widened as he saw it. His posture changed instantly. He straightened, hands clasping behind his back. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. Linda noticed the change and turned slowly toward the card. Her face drained of color. "What is this?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. Michael met her gaze. "My name," he said, "is Linda swallowed. "And this," he continued, "is my hotel." Ethan felt the room tilt. Not physically, but emotionally. For the first time since he'd walked into the lobby, the ground beneath him felt solid. Linda stood frozen. the authority she'd wielded so easily moments before evaporating in silence. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Now," he said calmly, "we're going to do this the right way." For a moment, no one spoke. The black card lay on the counter like a quiet verdict, not flashy, not dramatic, just undeniable. Linda Carter stared at it, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and calculation. She had spent years mastering the art of control, tone, posture, timing. Now, all of it felt suddenly useless. Michael Reynolds didn't look at the card anymore. He looked at the room. "Close the line," he said calmly. Tom Harris nodded at once. He turned to the guests waiting behind Ethan and spoke with a courtesy that carried a new firmness. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll resume service shortly." No one argued. No one complained. Something in the air told them this wasn't a delay you questioned. Tom guided people away from the counter, creating space. The lobby grew quieter, the way it does when curiosity overpowers convenience. Ethan stood still, the torn voucher trembling in his hands. He didn't know what to do with it now. It felt heavier than before, no longer a failed promise, but proof. Michael turned to him. "Ethan," he said gently. The boy flinched at the sound of his name. He hadn't realized Michael knew it. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied automatically. "You didn't do anything wrong," Michael said. The words were simple. They landed anyway. Ethan nodded, though his eyes shone with confusion more than relief. Adults said things like that sometimes, usually right before asking you to leave. Michael turned back to Linda. "How long?" he asked. Linda frowned. "How long what?" "How long have you been doing this?" Michael asked. "Tearing vouchers? Redirecting meals? Making decisions that weren't yours to make?" Linda crossed her arms again, reaching for a posture that had always worked before. "I was maintaining standards," she said. "The hotel's reputation—" "That's not an answer," Michael replied. Linda hesitated. Michael waited. Silence had become his tool. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "A few months," she said. "Maybe longer." The words rippled outward, quiet but destructive. Michael nodded once, absorbing it. "And the vouchers in the drawer?" he asked. "How many are there?" Linda didn't answer. Michael turned to Tom. "Count them." Tom swallowed and pulled the drawer open again. He lifted the stack carefully, laying them out on the counter. 1, 2, 3, 6, 10, 13. Each one bore the same foundation stamp. Different dates. Different names, written neatly in pen. Some had fingerprints smudged into the paper. Others were creased, folded carefully, as if someone had tried to protect them. Ethan leaned closer, eyes scanning the names without thinking. Then he froze. His breath caught. Michael noticed immediately. "What is it?" Ethan pointed with a shaking finger. "That one," he said. "The name? That's my friend." Michael followed his gaze. "What's his name?" he asked. "Nathan," Ethan said softly. "He's outside. He told me to go first because I looked worse." The words landed like a blow. Linda's face tightened. "That doesn't mean—" "Stop," Michael said quietly. He turned to Tom. "Check the kitchen log." Tom nodded and stepped away, returning moments later with a clipboard. "Today's count was 12, he said. 6 meals were returned as canceled." Michael closed his eyes briefly, not in anger, in confirmation. He opened them and looked at Linda again. "You didn't just tear paper," he said. "You erased people." Linda's voice rose defensively. "I didn't erase anyone. I redirected resources. This place isn't a shelter." Michael gestured toward Ethan. "Then why partner with the foundation?" he asked. "Why accept the agreement at all?" Linda faltered. "I was following what I thought was best." "What you thought looked best," Michael corrected. The piano music stopped. No one noticed when it happened, but the silence that followed felt intentional. Michael turned to the side corridor and raised his voice slightly. Not loudly, just enough. "Maria?" An older woman stepped forward from behind a service cart. She hesitated, then approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, sir?" "How many times have you seen kids leave here hungry?" Michael asked. Maria glanced at Linda, then back at Michael. "More than I can count," she said quietly. The room seemed to tilt again. "They come in early," she continued. "They wait. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just stand there like they're invisible." Ethan swallowed hard. Michael nodded. "Thank you," he said. Maria stepped back, her hands trembling. Michael turned back to Linda. "This wasn't a one-time lapse," he said. "This was a system." Linda shook her head. "You don't understand the pressure. Guests complain. They don't want to see hungry children," Michael finished. Linda didn't answer. Michael reached for the phone behind the counter. "Human resources," he said into the receiver. I need you in the lobby, now." He hung up and looked at Tom. "Escort Miss Carter to the side," he said. "Not out, just aside." Tom nodded and gestured gently. Linda hesitated, then followed, her heels quieter now, her confidence cracking with every step. Ethan watched, unsure how to feel. The woman who had made him feel small now looked smaller herself, but it didn't bring satisfaction, only exhaustion. Michael knelt slightly, bringing himself to Ethan's level. "You said your friend is outside?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Can you show me?" Ethan hesitated, then looked toward the revolving door. Michael stood. "Let's go." They stepped outside together. The cold hit immediately, sharp and unforgiving. The street was gray, people hurrying past without looking up. Ethan spotted Nathan near the bus stop, shoulders hunched, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Nathan!" Ethan called. Nathan looked up, relief flashing across his face before concern took over as he noticed Ethan's pale expression. "You okay?" Nathan asked. Ethan nodded quickly. "Come with us." Michael approached slowly, careful not to startle the boy. "I'm Michael," he said. "You must be Nathan." Nathan eyed him warily, then nodded. "You're hungry," Michael said, not as a question. Nathan shrugged. "We always are." Michael placed a hand gently on Nathan's shoulder. "Not today," he said. They turned back toward the hotel. Halfway there, Ethan staggered. Michael caught him instinctively, steadying his weight. Ethan shook his head, embarrassed. "I'm fine." But his legs didn't agree. He sank to his knees, the world blurring at the edges. Michael didn't hesitate. He lifted Ethan carefully, cradling him with the same ease one might lift a sleeping child. Inside the lobby, everything changed. Tom cleared a path. Maria ran ahead. Someone brought water. Someone else opened a side room near the kitchen. Michael laid Ethan down gently. Nathan hovered nearby, unsure whether to step closer or stay back. "You can stay," Michael said. Nathan did. Ethan stirred, eyes fluttering open. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Michael shook his head. "No apologies," he said. "Not here." In the lobby, HR arrived. Papers were exchanged, statements taken. Linda sat alone near the service corridor, her name badge removed and resting on the counter like an artifact from another life. Michael stood with his arms crossed, watching it all unfold. Not with triumph, but with resolve. He turned to Tom. "Starting today," he said, "every voucher gets honored. No exceptions, no discretion." Tom nodded. "Yes, sir." Michael looked toward the kitchen. "And if a child shows up without one," he added. Tom didn't hesitate. "We feed them," he said. Michael nodded. Ethan opened his eyes again, this time clearer. He smelled soup. Warm, real. Michael met his gaze. "Lunch is coming," he said. Ethan blinked, tears finally breaking free, not because he was hungry, but because for the first time in a long while someone had seen him and chosen to stay. Ethan didn't collapse the way people imagine collapse. There was no dramatic cry, no sudden scream for help. His body simply stopped cooperating. At first it was subtle, a slackening of his shoulders, a slight tremor in his hands as he tried to push himself upright on the narrow cot near the kitchen. The warmth in the room felt too heavy, too fast, as if his body didn't know what to do with it after so long in the cold. Michael noticed immediately. He had learned, over years of making decisions that affected others, to watch what people didn't say. Ethan's eyes had lost focus. His breathing was shallow, uneven. "Easy," Michael said, placing a steady hand on the edge of the cot. "Take your time." Ethan nodded, though it was unclear whether he had heard the words or simply recognized the tone. Nathan stood near the doorway, gripping the sleeves of the oversized gray coat Michael had draped over his shoulders earlier. He looked smaller inside it, almost swallowed by the fabric, but he didn't let go. "Is he okay?" Nathan asked quietly. Michael didn't answer right away. He glanced toward Maria, who had already returned with a damp cloth and a cup of warm water. "He hasn't eaten properly in a while," she said softly. "This happens." The words were simple. Familiar. Too familiar. Ethan tried to speak, but only a thin sound escaped his throat. He swallowed and tried again. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Michael shook his head, more firmly this time. "No," he said. "You don't apologize for your body doing what it needs to survive." Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment it seemed as if he had fallen asleep. Then his breathing hitched. Nathan took a step forward. "Ethan?" Ethan's fingers twitched once, then went still. That was when Michael acted. "Call emergency services," he said calmly, already moving. "Now." Tom Harris was at the door before the sentence finished. He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait for confirmation. He simply reached for the phone and dialed. Maria pressed the damp cloth to Ethan's forehead. "Stay with me, sweetheart," she murmured. "Just stay." The lobby outside had gone quiet in a way Michael recognized immediately. Not polite quiet, concerned quiet. Guests who had once avoided eye contact now stood clustered near the entrance to the service corridor, pretending not to stare while staring anyway. Whispers moved through the air, confused, uneasy, no longer dismissive. Nathan stood frozen, eyes wide. Michael crouched beside him. "You did the right thing," he said gently. "Coming with him." Nathan nodded, though his lip trembled. "I told him to go first," he said. "I thought I could wait." Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "You shouldn't have had to wait at all," he said. Ethan stirred suddenly, his body reacting as if pulled back by the sound of voices. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Nate?" he murmured. "I'm here," Nathan said quickly, stepping closer. "I'm right here." Ethan's gaze found him, relief softening his features for a split second. "Don't leave," Ethan whispered. "I won't," Nathan said. "I promise." Yes. Michael watched the exchange with a tightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He had sat in boardrooms where millions of dollars changed hands without a flicker of emotion. He had signed papers that affected entire departments, entire livelihoods. None of that had ever felt as heavy as this moment. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. Maria glanced up. "They're on their way." Michael nodded. "Good." Ethan's breathing slowed again, uneven and shallow. His skin felt clammy under Maria's touch. "Stay awake," she urged. "Just a little longer." Ethan didn't respond. Nathan reached out, hesitant, then gently took Ethan's hand. "I'm here," he repeated, his voice breaking. "You hear me?" Outside the small room, Linda Carter sat alone on a bench near the service entrance, her purse clutched tightly in her lap. She could hear the movement, the urgency, the raised voices. She didn't look toward the room. She didn't need to. The weight of what was happening pressed in on her from every side. She had told herself she was protecting standards, protecting image, protecting the hotel from complaints. She hadn't told herself she was deciding who ate and who didn't. The sirens grew louder. Tom returned, his face pale. "They're almost here," he said. Michael stood. "Clear the hallway," he said. "No spectators." Tom nodded and moved immediately, guiding curious guests back toward the lobby with a firmness that allowed no argument. Maria adjusted the blanket around Ethan's shoulders. "You're safe?" she whispered. "You're safe now." The word now lingered in the air. The paramedics arrived quickly, their movements efficient, practiced. They assessed Ethan with quiet urgency, attaching monitors, checking vitals. Nathan stepped back automatically, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. Michael placed a steady hand on his back. "They're helping him," he said. "This is the part where we let them do their work." Nathan nodded, tears slipping free now. One of the paramedics looked up. "How long since he last ate?" she asked. Michael answered without hesitation. "Long enough," he said. The paramedic nodded grimly. They lifted Ethan onto a stretcher. As they did, Ethan's eyes opened again, briefly. He looked around, disoriented, frightened. Michael leaned close. "You're not in trouble," he said softly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Ethan blinked. "I just wanted to eat," he whispered. Michael swallowed. "I know," he said. "And you will." The stretcher rolled out of the room, through the corridor, toward the lobby. Nathan followed automatically, then hesitated at the doorway. Michael caught up to him. "You're coming too," he said. Nathan looked uncertain. "You don't need anything," Michael said. "Just stay close." They emerged into the lobby. The space looked different now. Not because anything physical had changed, but because everyone was finally looking. Guests parted silently as the paramedics wheeled Ethan through. No phones were raised, no photos taken. Shame hung in the air, thick and unspoken. Linda stood as they passed, her face pale. Ethan didn't see her. His eyes were closed. The revolving doors opened, letting in a rush of cold air and gray daylight. The stretcher moved through, out onto the street. Michael followed until the ambulance doors closed. He stood there, hands in his coat pockets, watching as the vehicle pulled away. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he turned back inside. The lobby waited. Carmen Reyes, head of operations, had arrived while the ambulance was leaving. She stood near the counter now, posture straight, eyes sharp. She had already seen the drawer, the vouchers, the logs. She didn't need explanations. Michael approached her. "She did this more than once," Carmen said quietly. Michael nodded. "Yes." Carmen exhaled slowly. "And the child?" she asked. "He collapsed," Michael replied. "From hunger." Carmen closed her eyes for a brief moment. "When I was young," she said, My mother cleaned rooms in hotels like this. She used to tell me, you can always tell a place's soul by how it treats people when no one important is watching. She opened her eyes. This place lost its soul, she said. Michael met her gaze. Then we rebuild it, he replied. Properly. Carmen nodded once. I'll call HR, she said. Oh, and legal. Linda stood a few feet away, listening. Her name was no longer spoken. Her authority already gone. Carmen turned to her. Ms. Carter, she said calmly, please remove your badge and place it on the counter. Linda hesitated, then did as instructed. The small piece of plastic landed with a quiet click. Security will escort you to the service exit, Carmen continued. You'll be contacted regarding next steps. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. She walked toward the service corridor, heels quieter than ever. Nathan stood near Michael, clutching the gray coat tighter. Is Ethan going to be okay? He asked. Michael looked down at him. Yes, he said, because someone finally stopped pretending not to see him. Nathan nodded slowly. Michael placed a hand on his shoulder again. You're hungry too, he said. Nathan looked away, embarrassed. Michael didn't wait for an answer. Come on, he said, let's eat. They walked toward the kitchen, not as guests, not as charity cases, but as human beings who needed food and deserved it. Behind them, the lobby resumed its quiet, careful rhythm. But something fundamental had shifted, because once you see a child collapse from hunger in a place built on comfort and excess, you don't get to unsee it. And neither did Michael Reynolds. The kitchen was quieter than the lobby. Not silent, just honest. Pots simmered softly. Bread cooled on metal racks. The air carried the simple, comforting smell of soup and yeast. The kind of smell that doesn't impress anyone but makes the body relax before the mind knows why. Nathan sat at a small table near the wall, his hands wrapped around a warm bowl. He didn't eat right away. He waited, eyes fixed on the doorway, listening for footsteps that weren't coming yet. Michael noticed. He's in good hands, he said gently, setting a glass of water beside Nathan. They caught it early. Nathan nodded, though his shoulders remained tense. I should have gone in with him, he said quietly. I should have said something. Michael pulled out a chair and sat across from him. You did say something, he replied. You sent him first, you stayed, you came back with him. That matters. Nathan looked down at the soup, then finally took a bite. The heat made his eyes water, and he blinked quickly, embarrassed by how good it felt. Michael didn't comment. Across the kitchen, Maria worked silently, setting aside a second tray, one she hadn't been told to prepare, but knew would be needed. In the hours that followed, the hotel did not return to normal, and that was the point. Carmen Reyes moved through the building with purpose, speaking quietly but firmly to department heads, to staff, to legal counsel. There were forms to file, partnerships to review, procedures to correct. None of it was loud, none of it was theatrical. It was real. By evening, a notice went out to every department. All charity vouchers are to be honored immediately and without exception. Any guest, or non-guest, presenting a need for food is to be assisted discreetly and respectfully. No employee is authorized to deny a meal on the basis of appearance, age, or perceived status. No signatures, no slogans. Just policy. Michael stood in his office window as the city lights came on one by one, watching traffic slow and people hurry home. He had spent most of his career believing that systems only worked if you trusted the people running them. That belief had been expensive. Later that night, the call came. Ethan was stable, dehydrated, severely undernourished, exhausted in ways an 11-year-old should never be, but stable. Michael closed his eyes and exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He went back down to the kitchen. Nathan looked up the moment Michael entered. How is he? Michael smiled faintly. He's asking for you, he said. Nathan's chair scraped back as he stood too quickly. Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. Tomorrow morning, he added. He needs rest tonight. Nathan nodded, relief flooding his face. Will I be allowed to see him? He asked, careful not to assume. Michael didn't hesitate. Yes, he said, and you won't be alone. The next morning, the lobby looked the same. That was the illusion. The marbles still shone. The piano still played. Guests still checked in and out, coats brushed, keys exchanged. But something subtle had shifted. Near a quiet corners of the lobby, a small table stood where there hadn't been one before. No sign, no announcement. Just a table set simply, with soup, bread, water, and a clean place to sit. Not hidden, not advertised, just present. A few guests noticed, some frowned, most said nothing. One older man paused, watching as a tired-looking woman sat down, accepted a bowl, and exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. He nodded once, then continued on his way. At the hospital, Ethan woke slowly, blinking against the light. His first thought was confusion. His second was fear. He looked around the room, heart racing, until he saw Nathan asleep in a chair nearby, his head resting awkwardly against the wall, the gray coat folded neatly over his lap. Ethan relaxed. A nurse noticed his movement and smiled. "You gave us a scare," she said gently. Ethan frowned. "Am I in trouble?" The nurse's smile softened. "No," she said, "you're safe." Later that day, Michael came to visit. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring gifts. He brought time. He sat in the chair by Ethan's bed and listened as the boy talked. About school, about buses, about how sometimes you learn which places you don't belong to by how quickly people tell you. Michael listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, he asked one question. "What do you want to do?" Ethan thought for a long moment. "I want to help in the kitchen," he said finally. "I like how it smells there." Michael smiled. "That can be arranged," he replied. The weeks that followed were quiet ones. Ethan returned to school with more energy than he'd had in months. Nathan started helping out after classes, learning to carry trays without apologizing for taking up space. Maria showed them how to wash their hands properly, how to stack plates, how to move through a room without being invisible. No speeches were made. No photos were taken. Linda Carter did not return. Her name badge remained in a drawer for the remainder of that week, then was removed without ceremony. There were meetings, investigations, consequences that unfolded away from public view. Michael insisted on that. "Justice doesn't need an audience," he told Carmen. "It needs consistency." A month later, a guest complained. Not loudly, not angrily. Just enough. "This is a hotel," the guest said quietly, nodding toward the small table in the lobby. "Not a shelter." The new lobby manager listened, nodded, and replied evenly. "This is a place where no one with hunger is invisible." And then she returned to her work. Ethan noticed things differently now. He noticed how people stood, how they waited, how some learned to shrink long before anyone told them to. When he saw a younger boy hovering near the table one afternoon, unsure whether to sit, Ethan didn't call attention to him. He simply pulled out a chair. That was all it took. Michael watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, as the boy sat down and began to eat. He thought about power, not the kind that signs checks or opens doors, but the kind that decides whether someone feels human in a room. The kind that can destroy quietly, or restore. He had learned something that day in the lobby, something no report or board meeting could have taught him. You don't need to be important to do the right thing. But when someone important chooses to look, the truth has nowhere to hide. And in the end, what saves people isn't grandeur. It's bread that's warm, a chair pulled out at the right moment, and the decision, made once and kept forever, that dignity is not something anyone has to earn. Sometimes the most important lessons don't come from grand speeches or dramatic victories. They come from quiet moments, when someone is treated as invisible and another person chooses to truly see them. This story reminds us that dignity is not a reward for success, wealth, or status. It is a basic human right, and the way we treat the most vulnerable among us reveals who we really are, not when it's convenient, but when no one is watching. You don't need power to act with kindness. But when kindness is backed by courage, it can change more than one life. It can change an entire system. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a moment where kindness or silence made all the difference? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe stories like this matter, please consider subscribing. Because sometimes one story is enough to remind us that humanity is still worth believing in.